Okay, Shalom, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Now I will explain about the story entitled On the Road 1935 by Langston Hughes, American Literature. So, first is about biography of the writer. James Mercer Langston Hughes or Langston Hughes was born on February 1, 1902 in Joplin, Missouri. His parents, James Hughes and Caroline Hughes, separated soon after his birth, and his father moved to Mexico. While Hughes' mother moved around during his youth, Hughes was raised primarily by his maternal grandmother, Mary. Hughes graduated from high school in 1920 and spent the next year in Mexico with his father. In 1921, Hughes returned to the United States and enrolled at Columbia University, where he studied briefly, and in November 1924, Hughes returned to the United States and held various jobs. In 1925, he was working as a busboy in a hotel restaurant in Washington, D.C. On May 22, 1967, Langston Hughes died of complications from prostate cancer. As a tribute to his poetry, his funeral contained few eulogy, but was filled with jazz and blues music. Next is history of personal life of writer. Langston Hughes was an American poet, novelist, playwright, and activist. He was born February 1, 1902 in Joplin, Missouri, and spent much of his childhood moving from place to place due to his parents' separation and financial difficulties. Despite these challenges, Hughes developed a passion for literature and writing at a young age. In his early 20s, Hughes traveled extensively, spending time in Mexico, Europe, and Africa. This experience greatly influenced his writing and world view. He became a leading figure of the Harlem Renaissance, a culture movement that celebrated African American art, music, and literature. In terms of his personal life, Hughes was openly gay at a time when homosexuality was not widely accepted. He had a number of romantic relationships with men throughout his life, but was never able to openly acknowledge his sexuality in his writing or public life due to the societal taboos of the time. Next is the other literary works of writer. The other literary works of writer are Harlem, I Too, Mother to Son, The Negro Speaks of Rivers, The Weary Blues, Fine Clothes to the Jew, Thank You Ma'am, My People, Mulatto, Mulbone, Tambourines to Glory, The First Book of Jazz, Let America Be America Again, The Dream Keeper and Other Poems. The Dream Keeper. Next is synopsis of the story. On the Road is a short story by Langston Hughes that was first published in the 1930s. The story follows a young African American named Sergeant and his friend Wesley, who are traveling north on a freight train. While on their way, they met a white man named Carleton. Carleton offers them temporary housing in his house as well as jobs. Although infinitely hesitant, Sergeant eventually accepts the offer. However, at the Carleton home, Sergeant is referred to as George and is made to do heavy household chores. Meanwhile, Wesley feels uncomfortable and leaves the Carleton home. After learning that Carleton was actually a member of the Ku Klux Klan, Sergeant decided to leave the house and continue his journey. At the end of the story, Sergeant returned to the freight train and reflects on the experience he just had, even though he had an unpleasant experience at the Carleton house. Sergeant realized that he had to keep fighting and not give up in his search for a job and a better life. The story On the Road describes the racism and injustice experienced by African Americans at that time. Through the character Sergeant, Hughes conveys an important message about the importance of maintaining hope and enthusiasm in the face of adversity and discrimination. Next is about the similarities the personal life of writer with his literary works. Both characters, Sergeant and Hughes, are African Americans living during the Great Depression in the United States. They both struggled to find a way out of the economic difficulties and racial discrimination that occurred at the time. Like Hughes, Sergeant was a writer who looked to his works for inspiration. Next is about the difference, the personal life of the writer with his literary works. Sergeant is a fictional character, while Hughes is an actual writer and social activist. Hughes has access to real-life experiences as an African American living during the Great Depression, while Sergeant exists only in Hughes' imagination as a character. Although both of them had difficulties in their lives, Hughes had an advantage as he had writing skills and creativity which helped him express his experience and struggles through his works, while Sergeant was only able to feel the difficulties he was going through. Throughout the story On the Road, Hughes used the fictional character Sergeant to describe experience that many African Americans might have had at that time. Despite the difference between Hughes and Sergeant as characters, Haggis draws on his personal experience to give the story familiarity and realism. Next is about analysis character. On the Road is a short story by Langston Hughes, a famous writer and poet of the Harlem Renaissance. The story follows a black man traveling by train in the United States in the 1950s. The following is an analysis of the main characters in this story. Black man. This black man is the main character in this story. He is a migrant worker who travels from city to city looking for work. Hughes describes the characters as tired, lonely, and troubled by the racial discrimination he experienced. Even so, he is also described as a character who is patient and never give up in facing life's difficulties. White passengers. The white passenger sitting next to the black man is a supporting character in this story. Although he only appears in a few paragraphs, this character becomes a symbol of the social injustice that occurred at the time. She is described as being arrogant and belittling black men, even accusing him of stealing her wallet without sufficient evidence. Next is train driver. The train driver is also a supporting character in this story. He is described as a friendly and caring person for passengers, especially black men. He helped black men by giving them food and drink and calmed his mind when he felt lonely and discriminated against. Through these characters, Hughes describes the social and political conditions of the United States at the time, which were still full of racial discrimination and injustice. The black man in this story represents the many black migrant workers who lived in poverty and hardship in the United States at the time, while the arrogant white passengers represent the discriminatory behavior they faced. Next is about analysis story. On the Road is a short story by Langston Hughes that describes the experience of a black man traveling by train in the American South in the 1930s. This story raises the theme of racism and social injustice experienced by black people at the time. In this story, the main character is heading to the city of New Orleans in search of work. He traveled by train and had to sit in the back of the train, known as the Black Train because it was reserved for black people only. On the train, he meets a wealthy black man and chooses to sit on the white train, which is reserved for white people. This wealthy man invites the main character to join him in the white carriage, but the main character refuses for fear of further punishment or discrimination. During the trip, the main character meets a black woman who is on her way to New Orleans to look for work. He spoke to the woman and felt sympathy for her situation. However, when the train arrived at the next station, the woman was arrested by the railway officials for not having a valid ticket. The main character feels sad and angry because the woman has done nothing wrong other than looking for a job. Next, in this story, Haggis describes the social injustice faced by black people at the time. Despite being granted the right to travel by train, they still have to sit in the back and are treated unfairly. It also shows that the social and economic disparities between black and white people were very large, and that at the time where it was difficult for black people to get decent jobs. With a simple and straightforward writing style, the story on the road manages to convey a strong message about the social injustice and racism experienced by black people at the time. This story is an important work of literature for understanding the history of the struggle for civil rights and racial equality in the United States. And in my opinion, if in life at the time there was mutual respect, then there would not be racist conflicts between black people with white people. What matters is mutual respect. Next is message of the story. The message of the story is Haggis conveys the message that social injustice must be overcome and that people must unite to fight discrimination and injustice in society. So that's all of me, and thank you for your attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.